This video will help you complete page 8 of your small engine reconditioning packet. The camshaft is an important internal component of the engine. 3 of the camshaft's main functions are to determine how far the valves open, when the valves open and close, and to possibly drive auxiliary items. Through the completion of this page, you will measure the journals, bearings, and the lobes on the camshaft. The items you'll need to complete this page include your engine block, the front cover / sump cover / crankcase cover, your camshaft, a micrometer, and a telescoping or small hole gauge. The first step of page 8 is to measure the camshaft journals. Before we begin measuring, I would advise you to draw a simple diagram on your packet and label which end of the camshaft you consider side A and which end is side B. This will also allow you to correctly identify which bearing goes to which journal as we progress through this page. As I measure the journals of the camshaft, I will measure each journal twice in perpendicular directions. This will allow me to determine if the journals are out or round or not, and also allow me to calculate an average for a more accurate measurements. For all of my measurements for this page, I use a 0 to 1 inch micrometer. Here is what I measured for A1. Now measure perpendicular to A1 to find A2. Here is my reading for A2. I'll now measure the journals at the other end of the camshaft for measurements B1 and B2. Here is my measurement for B1. Here I am measuring my last camshaft journal measurement, B2. Here's that B2 measurement. With the journals now measured, we'll move on to measuring the bearings. Make sure you are correctly matching the right journal to the correct bearing. This is why we drew that quick diagram at the beginning of this video. For my example, A journal is the journal that rides in the bearing in the front cover. Again, we'll measure each bearing twice to allow us to calculate the bearings out or round and to get an average measurement that is more accurate. Make sure you avoid any oil passages when completing this measurement. Here is my A1 bearing measurement. Here I am using a small hole gauge to measure A2. Here is my A2 measurement. For my B side bearing measurements, I'll need to grab my engine block. The bearing for B1 and 2 is located in my engine block per my diagram. Just like my other bearing measurements, I need to make sure I avoid any oil passages located in the bearings. Here's my B1 measurement. I'll now complete my B2 measurement by measuring the same bearing again, but only perpendicular to my B1 measurement. Remember, for my engine, I use a 0 to 1 inch micrometer for all of my measurements. Here's what I measured for B2. Now that you have your camshaft journals and bearings measured, you'll need to calculate the average clearance for each end. The clearance is the space between the journal and the bearing. These calculations will tell you if you measure correctly or if there's something wrong with your camshaft and its bearings. If your bearing clearance is a negative number, you either completed the equation incorrectly or you measured incorrectly. If your bearing clearance is more than a few thousandths of an inch, your measurements are either done not accurately or one of your components have excessive wear. Your specifications from the manual will help you determine what is wrong. The last part of the camshaft that you will be measuring is the camshaft lobes. If you're not sure which lobe is the intake lobe and which is the exhaust lobe, simply place your camshaft back in the engine block and look to see which lobe is lined up with the exhaust port. The exhaust port is the hole in the side of the block that the muffler was bolted to. Now that I have determined which lobe is which, I like to use my front cover as a stand to hold my camshaft as I measured the lobes. This helps make the measurement easier on me. Once again, I used a 0 to 1 inch micrometer to complete these measurements. Here's my intake lobe measurement. I will now measure the exhaust lobe. Here is what I measured for my exhaust lobe measurements. With all my measurements completed, I will now answer the last question of this page. I'll use all my numbers and compare them to specifications and perform a visual inspection to determine if my camshaft needs additional attention or not. Once you have answered this question, you are now complete with page 8 of your packet.